And welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is interpretation and how our interpretation of events and experiences shapes our internal and external responses and environment experience. So before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen just flooding your lungs and flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, your organs, and bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any negativity, tension, stress, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, energizing, electrifying, illuminating all your cells, all your molecules and electrons, lighting you up from the inside out. And as you exhale any remaining stress, tension, negativity, fatigue, and now gently press your palms together and just rub softly your fingers against your palms to feel that wonderful, delicious sensation and allow yourselves to become present right here, right now. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So good morning, Rosalind, and everyone else who's joining us. So great to have you here with us today. And it's another new week. The time just flies by. It's remarkable. Anyway, today we're going to talk about interpretation. And I had a really interesting conversation with a former client and a dear friend last night, talking about how our interpretation of our experience can really shape our future experience. So the example that we were talking about was when someone has a breakthrough in the context of coaching or personal growth. When we have a breakthrough in the context of personal growth, and then we have a what looks like a regression. It looks like a regression, right? This is interpretation, right? When we're not evidencing that same breakthrough behavior, for instance, or it looks like we're reverting back to earlier behaviors. All of those words, even in expressing this topic, are indicators that there's a judgment, right? That I've backslid, that I have regressed, that rather than perhaps noticing, oh, this is a familiar behavior, taking it as feedback. We've talked about failure as feedback rather than failure. So the interpretation was, this doesn't work, or this isn't working. Like I get a brief result and then it goes away. And so the interesting thing to me is that we could be easily interpreting the same circumstance to say, well, we're making progress. It's not showing in the way that I think it should show. It's not showing it in the way that I would prefer or expect it to show. And I noticed that these instances are happening more and more, for instance, or, we impose our interpretation on experience, and then we believe those interpretations and then project future experience based on those interpretations. So it's a really, really interesting dynamic that we do. And I think it's worthy of attention, like especially as people that are engaged in the pursuit of evolution, or let's say not even the pursuit, but the commitment to evolution and to growing and to awakening and to being more and more aware and conscious and conscientious, that as we reflect upon our own internal perceptions and interpretations, it offers an inroad, it offers access to greater insight and I think more presence. I'm just going to bring it back to presence, because I think that's the key to all of it. You know, like we were also talking about want or desire. Different. We'll make a distinction between the two. Want is where there's a lack. Desire is perhaps positively moving forward to an inspired desire. Want is emphasizing lack. I think desire might be more emphasizing possibility. But anyway, we were talking about wanting to do all the things. And I have mixed feelings about the doing of all the things, you know, when it's about the doing versus the inspiration, you know, like the bucket list kind of thing. When we think of the bucket list, those are hopefully inspired dreams. But if we pursue the bucket list like things that we get to check off, then it's about the doing rather than the experience of the thing. So good morning, Andrea. So good to have you here with us. We're talking about interpretation and how the way that we interpret events influences the way that we interact with them. So for instance, if we interpret events, even if they're difficult events, as perfect, then our response to things is going to be very different than if we respond to or interpret an event as terrifying or threatening, right? If we perceive something as a gift rather than a threat, there's going to be a very, very different response to it, right? So Rosalind says, so reframe the idea of change more in line with feedback. Yes. Feedback. So the thing is about feedback, we get to interpret that too, right? So the idea is to be able to move away from judgment. We can say, okay, here was my intended outcome. Here's what the behavior was. I noticed that this behavior didn't, or this activity or this whatever didn't accomplish this objective. What did it accomplish? So you're getting the feedback that maybe it wasn't the proper or the most effective way to achieve X, but maybe it achieved Y, and maybe, who knows, Y might be more valuable for this moment. Y might be, I'm sorry. Okay, I apologize. So what happened was she's got these little pin feathers, and sometimes they're very, very sensitive. And my finger got caught on one of them, so she got very upset. But she appreciates when I apologize to her, as you could see. For any of you who haven't been here before, this is Maggie. She's really the star of the show. She just sort of tolerates me. Actually, that's not true. We love each other, I think. I mean, I know I love her, and I think she loves me. Anyway, so yes, reframe the idea of change more in line with feedback. So I've seen with the coaching clients where in many cases people get frustrated with the speed of change, or what seems to be the same thing persisting, and then getting a negative expectation of this is never going to work, or this should look this way, I should be here by now. And therefore, you know, when something occurs that isn't in line with that expectation, then the interpretation is that it's not working. Well, my experience is that everything we do is having an impact. It may not have the visible impact that we expect or that we would prefer, but it's all working. And so it's really interesting to me that people work and work and work to get change. And then all of a sudden, all this change occurs. Well, what I expect is that all that time, all that work is not for naught. And again, this is interpretation. This is my interpretation. It's not for naught. It's not that it didn't work. It's that it was reshaping, laying foundation, building strength, building a foundation. And then all of a sudden, bam, when everything is in its place, then we see recognizable transformation. And it's kind of like when you build, and this is a bad example because it's, well, maybe it isn't. So when you're building something with if you were building a house of cards, right? You build and build and build, and eventually there's one card, everything's okay, and then there's one card and it makes it all collapse. That's kind of the thing with these breakthroughs. That you're building and building and building, and eventually what happens is that matrix, or maybe you're pulling one stick away and one stick away, and eventually then the thing that was holding the negative pattern in place collapses. So I think it's interesting because this is when we think about negative expectations, like nothing works for me, or this won't work, nothing works for me, for instance. That's a negative expectation, right? And so then when the result of whatever it was doesn't turn out the way that it quote unquote should, when it would if it worked, then we can say, oh, it didn't work. See, it was right, rather than looking for, well, what is different? Because there are subtle changes that are clues that occur that can enable us to recognize our progress. And the thing that I notice a lot with coaching clients and myself is that oftentimes we don't recognize our wins. And this is something that I do coach people into, is to celebrate the wins, is to create a breakthrough journal. It's because even the little things are indicators that something is happening. And it gives us a perspective to be able to look back when we feel like we aren't going anywhere, or things aren't going quickly enough, in big air quotes. Then we get to look back on this breakthrough journal and see that there are incremental changes that occur. And even in a given moment, those things aren't wiped out. Again, interpretation. My interpretation is that in a given moment, those breakthroughs aren't wiped out. If I'm in a place where I'm not feeling super resourceful, it's not that they're wiped out. It's that, well, again, we get to interpret, but I interpret it as we get to move through deeper layers of things, kind of like, the onion peeling the many layers to get deeper and deeper. And some of those layers look like previous layers. Some of those layers look like layers that weren't as deep. And we get to interpret, like when we keep revisiting what looks like the same issue, we can say, oh my gosh, I haven't gotten past that. Or we can interpret to say, oh, I'm approaching it now from a different frequency. There's another facet of this that I get to work with. Not that none of this has worked and nothing's changed, but that there's a dimension of experience that has shifted, and we now get a another dimensional perspective on something. Because haven't you all been through the experience in personal growth where the same issue just keeps coming up over and over and over and over and over again, and it feels like, oh my gosh, nothing has changed. I've been working with this forever, and when am I going to grow? Well, I know that has happened in my experience quite a lot with deep issues. And what I have recognized over the years is that the perspective from which, or the frequency from which I am over time able to interact with that issue is different. It has evolved, it has transformed. And I think we get to, again, choose how we interpret these things. I choose to interpret that I'm evolving, and that the perspective that I have on it now, the same topic or the same issue, is very, very, very different from the way that I came at it in the past. And that in itself, I could say that it means I'm not evolving, I'm not growing, or I could say, I could look to see and use that as confirmation that yes, I am indeed evolving and I am indeed growing. And when we recognize our evolution, I think it's really important. And I think it's really important also in a way that it supports us. I think it's really important to remember those things in times when we feel like we have, where we feel like we're more challenged, like where we're not where we would like to be, where we would prefer to be. And the interpretation, I guess the foundation interpretation is this the same or is this different? And I think that as human beings, there's like this glimmer of a new idea happening here. I think as human beings, we tend to look for sameness in as a predisposition, because there's some safety in that. It's like, this is familiar, and therefore I can say it's the same, and that gives me a context from which to interact with whatever that is, right? But and I think that this is problematic for us in so many ways, because as we're present to new experiences, we tend to say, oh, this is the same experience. And while there may be many commonalities of whatever the experience is in the present, the fact is that it is a new experience. It may have many similarities. There may be knowledge and information and feedback that we've been able to glean from past occurrences of a similar experience, but the fact is that this is a new experience. And so that interpretation of familiarity, it serves us, and it also undermines us. Good morning, Isabel. So good to have you here with us. Welcome. So the interpretation of familiarity can undermine us, because when we think that we know what something is, there's a degree of dismissiveness that we have about it. It's like we don't have to investigate it further. We don't have to be present to it in the same way as if it were new. And certainly that helps us navigate the world, because otherwise we would be constantly overwhelmed by input. But it also, at the same time that it enables us to function, through this level, this degree of familiarity with things, it also becomes an obstacle to our capacity to be responsive, truly responsive, I think. So Maggie's bowing. We've been working on getting her to bow. So I think that we get to be conscious of our interpretations. And that can be in individual interactions, it can be in world events, it can be in our own feelings about things. Again, we've talked a lot about projection, and that's really what interpretation is as well. And interpretation, I'm not saying interpretation is a negative thing. I'm saying that it can have negative and positive impact, and it can have neutral impact too. I don't know, given that human beings are meaning-making machines, I don't know if we get to escape interpreting things. And yet, if we can bring our interpreting to conscious awareness, to more conscious awareness, perhaps we have the capacity to be offering ourselves greater freedom and greater capacity to be responsive, to be present. So I guess it is very much like the conversation of, how do you get a fish to recognize water, right? Because it is the environment that the fish resides in. It's like not something that there's anything to compare it to. So to find a way to presence ourselves to our interpretations, which are like the water that we swim in, it's a unique kind of endeavor. So Rosalind says, being open to interpret a familiar experience means not to dismiss it. Doing so could hinder the expansion of the experience. 100%, Rosalind. Thank you for that. Yes. So being open to interpreting or to a new interpretation of a familiar experience does mean not dismissing it, not categorizing it and cataloging it and saying like, oh, they're just doing that again, about somebody who has a behavior that you have interpreted as a certain way or a certain thing or a certain meaning. It's not being as dismissive, to be able to interpretations, I recognize that interpretation is a necessity of living, right? That we are assimilating or being bombarded by so much information all the time that interpretation's a necessity, or we would be immobilized, right? And the thing is that we interpret, and this is really interesting too, if we think about it, we interpret things visually, right? We are trained into interpreting things visually. So because we have a reference for something, like we can look at a 3D or a perspective drawing and we can understand what that is meant to be. We translate it, we interpret it as representing something through space. And in fact, it's on a two-dimensional surface, right? But we are able to interpret it in 3D. We're able to interpret distance. We're able to interpret facial expressions, voice intonations, weather signals, danger, affection. We're able to interpret all kinds of things. And there's a necessity that we do that again, or we would be unable to function without being able to interpret things. And our interpretations affect our experience. So if I interpret something as pain, or let's say I interpret something as dangerous, then I'm going to interact with that thing in a very different way than if I interpreted it with curiosity, for example. So there are certain things it's a good idea to interpret, like for instance, flame, right? I could be interpreting flame as dangerous and just stay as far away from it as possible. Or I could be knowing that if I put my hand in there, it's likely I'm going to get burned. So in that respect, that's feedback that I get to say, okay, probably better not to put my hand in the flame. And I can also recognize the utility of flame for many other things. That's also an interpretation, right? So I think as we look at events in our lives that are challenging and fraught with emotion, with intensity, with negativity, that maybe those are times that we get to look at what's our interpretation, what's our projection, what's our interpretation, and how is that interpretation directing, affecting, impacting my behavior, for example. So anyway, that's today's topic. I want to say thank you for being here with me. As always, you brighten my day, and I have received so much growth from the opportunity to share these musings with you and to get your feedback and to sort of play with all kinds of ideas. I'm so grateful for it. And I hope it's been as much of a contribution to you as it has been to me. I'm just really appreciative. So I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live each weekday morning here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. And please check out all the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network on the Facebook page, as well as Enlightened World Living and EWN One with the Earth. And let's take today to be alert to the interpretations of things that cause us disruption and discomfort, and maybe look for new interpretations of those events or circumstances, or even our own thoughts. And with that, I look forward to seeing you again soon. And again, thank you for playing with me on these morning musings. So much love.